This is the Roadshow, and I'm David Warren. Notice that I didn't say I'm your host, David Warren. Well, that's because after 36 years of being a part of Oasis Radio Network, it's my turn to be interviewed. I figured I would do this someday, but I never could mentally settle on whom to choose as my interviewer, as that's part of my job as program director here at Oasis, to assign guests to hosts. Finally, a name popped into my head. Of course, it's the perfect choice as my interviewer. My predecessor, Kim Spence. Kim and I both started at Oasis in our founding year, 1986, with her hosting the Roadshow a couple of years before I signed on as a fill-in host. Well, shortly after that, Kim left to pursue additional interests, and yours truly took over the main hosting duties. Since then, I've done thousands of interviews, and surely I'll have something to talk with Kim about today. At this time, I switch hats from host to guest and welcome back my longtime friend, Kim Spence.
Thank you, David Warren. Wow, what an amazing career that you have had on Oasis Radio Network. And I am honored to be the host and guest host for this program because I love you. I love Oasis Network. I love everything about what happens through the Oasis Network. And as you mentioned, being a part of that so many years ago, when we were 5, is when we started. But being a part of that so many years ago, I look back now and I can say that when we started Oasis Network, when we were there in the night hours, putting songs onto, it looked like 8-track tapes at the time. When we were there doing that, little did we know where life would take us at that point. When you're in your 20s is what we were when we started. You kind of feel
20.
We were 20. You feel like life will always be the same. Like these are the same people that will always be in my life. This is always what I'll be doing. And as we've learned now over the decades that we can say that life changes and a lot of different ebbs and flows happen in life. And so to be back in this moment in time with you, I'm honored. Thank you for giving me this place to be with you today.
Well, nobody else in my mind would do a better interview of me than you, because I would say nobody knows me better than you know me.
Well, we started career-wise at Oasis Network, but, our paths crossed way before then.
We were, not friends, but classmates in junior high.
Right.
And then we became great friends in high school.
Yes. Yeah, in junior high, we were in band together.
At one school.
Yes.
In high school, it's interesting that we both went to the same middle school.
Yes.
But then we went to the same high school, which was not part of the same school system.
Right. We changed school systems about the same time, you a little bit ahead of me. And I look back at that and I even think, I remember listening to David Ingles' music before we were even close friends.
And that's my father.
And that is your father, yes. And so I look back at that and I think, again, how God weaves the tapestry of our lives together in ways that are only God can do, that we could never plan to make happen. And so we've experienced a lot of life together. We have had wonderful times. We've had challenges, as every life does. And what we always say, and part of what happens in this time of life is to remind our friends that are listening today that, to stay on the path, to keep on the path that you're on, because you never know how God's going to weave and wind you back into a path that you may think, how did I get back here? And so I want to toss that out today, that you never know where God's going to bring you back. It's kind of like the idea of saying, keep your bridges there.
How
keep
I'm
them built.
interpreting that is, if there's something that you enjoyed that you mourn being over,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily over. You just might have hit the pause button.
I love that. That's why you are the best host for the Oasis Network
I cannot
Roadshow.
interview myself, nor should I. I do
Okay.
want to say that this interview is being conducted in my apartment. I'm an
Yes.
apartment dweller.
Yes.
I have a nice apartment.
Beautiful.
Because it's my home. So I treat it like my home and decorate it like my home. I really preferred to do an interview where I'm the interviewee, not at the Oasis Radio Network. I wanted it to feel different as well as hopefully sound different.
And it's going to sound a little different, I'm sure. So that rather than being in a professional studio where everything is set up and ready for recording.
Now, when I say sound different, I see what you're taking that as. You're saying ambiance noise.
But you mean something else.
I mean sound different in that my walls are going to be down.
Yeah,
Which,
I love
as an
it.
interviewer, I'm not here or typically here
Right.
to talk about myself.
Right. And you do a great job with that, by the way. I've always said when I listen to your shows that one of the things that really does stand out is that you are highlighting your guests, that you have a great way of making sure that the guest is front and center. A lot of times you hear interviews and the interviewer talks the majority of the time over the guest. So here's what I don't want to do is make that me. So having said that, okay. So David Warren, as we were preparing for this show,
We or you?
well, me.
Because,
Me.
FYI, I don't know the questions.
He has not seen any of the questions. He has not seen even any of my notes of things that I wanted to talk about, which I have about 6 pages. So I
It
don't
won't go
know.
that long.
I don't know if we'll get to that
No,
today. But
it's late afternoon and I haven't eaten dinner, or I had a very light lunch.
So what I do want to start with, though, is because I just kind of want to dive in here. How would you describe Oasis Network to someone who has never heard it before?
Well, if you're talking to a person who is not a Christian believer, you might say, I work at, well, actually, I learned this from one of my guests that I interviewed, and that would be that instead of saying, I work at, or I am a, fill in the blank, I inspire people. And I do that through means of radio. In my case, at Oasis Radio Network, which has inspirational music and inspirational talk. And our byline is a refreshing place to be. So if you need refreshment, I suggest you tune in to the frequency or oasisnetwork.org to listen online, or with your smartphone or smart device, or even with voice activated devices now.
Well, I think that's interesting because it's who you are to be an inspirer then. It's not just about your job. That's who David, if I say, who is David Warren? I mean, sometimes when we ask that, it's such a broad question, but you narrowed that down great. So the idea, if I said, so who is David Warren? What are you on this earth to do, David?
Well, make a difference, for lack of a better answer. It would be very sad, I believe, if I thought, or anybody thought who's listening, that they're not making a difference. I would hope they would feel sad about that.
Right. Well, I think sometimes...
And make an adjustment.
You think of making a difference in a way, of course, we're, as a Christian, coming from a network that is playing Christian music, playing, the teaching, it seems to us to be a natural thought. But there are a lot of people that are searching for, what am I on this earth for? But I believe that you nailed that without having to have a 5-sentence long paragraph about what I do. It's who I am is an inspiration, as you said. So when you started, here we started in the 80s, as you said, in Oasis Network. And when you started, you were kind of getting into the program director role, but really, what was the first thing you were doing at Oasis Network?
Getting a paycheck to have fun Friday and Saturday nights.
Yeah.
But then I started in my A-type personality and really calling ultimately to see all that needed to get done that had not been done yet.
Which was, like, for example, what does that
organization of the music library, first of all. First of all, attaining a music library.
Because what people don't understand with radio is most of the time it comes, like it's being bought by a big conglomerate, corporation, and it comes with music.
Or even if it's a mom and pop type situation where you start a radio station, if you want to do, Christian top 40, you can go buy that library.
Right.
But anybody who listens to Oasis knows we have quite a unique music format. And so those little gems have to be discovered and acquired. And so probably I would say the thing I'm most proud of is the library that we have. And that is why I'm so adamant about backups. So just an FYI, we have our full library, which Kim now, as of this taping, well, I mean, if you let's just say music, not liners and jingles and all that. I would say we're probably at 11,000 songs. So those 11,000 songs are at the network. We call it the station, but it's all the stations. But it's also in 2 other undisclosed locations as a safety.
Yeah, which makes sense. When Oasis Network started, like you said before, it was about getting records and getting things to be able to to start on air, because there was nothing to start with. There wasn't a library that was purchased, and because Oasis Network is not a top 40 Christian playing network.
No, people would give us their records. I think we have some of your mom's records and your records
Yeah.
in the library.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the first, and we would be up till 12:30 in the morning recording. We said dubbing songs off of records onto 8. It looks like an 8-track tape is what we started with.
It's called a cart.
Yeah.
Cartridge, short for cartridge.
Yeah.
And I am so glad that we are out of the cartridge era, because things can go wrong with tape, and it's just that much worse when it's on the air, when the tape breaks or starts to drag. Do you remember dragging carts?
Yes. Like, or there are times, where it gets spun up in the player, like in your vehicle, if you ever had an 8-track player,
Or
it would
cassette
do
player.
some kind of weird thing and get offline. And it was, did you ever have nightmares, bad dreams about things like that?
Every DJ will tell you this, that he or she has woken up in a cold sweat because they were having the nightmare that they were playing a record or a cartridge, a cart, or whatever. And nowadays it would be all digital.
Yeah.
But it was on their shift, and it was their job
Yeah.
to make sure they had the next thing ready to play. And they'd be in the bathroom or lock themselves out of the station, and the song would end, and it's dead air, and it's all on you. And then you wake up and you realize, oh, thank God, that was just a bad dream. That was a bad dream. I do want to mention, though, in building the library for the music library, and the reason I said that we have 2 other backups in undisclosed locations is, well, I'm not even going to release that out into the atmosphere, but the most precious thing we have at Oasis is that library. and all the data that we have. Because you can always go create another station if you had to, but that's what you would need.
Sure.
So I'm glad we're talking about the library. And Kim and I, she followed me to high school, but then she also followed me to college. We both went to Oral Roberts University, and years preceding our years at ORU, there was a station named KORU, which had been off the air for many years by the time we went to college. And of course, we took the same major, telecommunications. And one of the teachers there mentioned that there was a full record library from the old KORU days. So this would have been stuff from the 50s and 60s, maybe 70s. And anybody who listens to Oasis knows that we go all the way back to the beginning of when Christian or then sacred music was put on a format that you could listen back to.
Like a Kate Smith.
Mahalia
Jackson.
Yeah. Those types of people. I think of the White Sisters as well. I think of Bob Daniels. I think of early Ralph Carmichael music. Well, anyhow, the professor that we had said they're upstairs in this storage area at ORU, and you can take all that you want. So do you remember the Mad Scramble that I talked you into? So it was like, one of those shopping, you can everything you get in your cart in the next 2 minutes.
Right.
So whether we thought we'd play it or not, we grabbed every record, LP, we could grab and stuck it in the car and drove it to the station. And Kim, we're still storing those. Some of those have not even been listened to yet.
Wow.
But of course, we cherry picked the artists that we knew were the main artists of import. So,
and that's what's amazing too, is to think, because I remember when we started, and I'm going to assume or guess, and it might have been the same for you, some artists, even that we were playing at the time, that I hadn't ever heard their music before. How about you?
Same thing.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of the White Sisters.
Yeah.
I knew who Ralph Carmichael was. I knew who Bob Daniels was. That's a story for another day.
Okay.
Because Bob Daniels introduced my mother and father.
Oh my goodness, I never heard that
You didn't know
story.
that?
No, I never heard that story.
Yes, if it weren't for Bob Daniels, I would not be here.
Wow.
I'll tell you that over dinner.
Okay.
This is about me, right?
Well, hey, it is about you, because again, the idea with this is for friends who listen to you and they know that you're a consummate professional. When you are interviewing people, you're spot on, but you share very little about yourself personally, which I wanted to ask you, what kind of, who's your style of interview fashioned after?
Larry King.
That was not even a thought that you had.
No, because I used to watch him, not just for the interviews, but I would study him. And
what was it that drew you to him versus even an Oprah or somebody like that who was popular?
Well,
or Phil Donahue.
Well, their shows had studio audiences. Radio doesn't have a studio audience. You hope there's a studio audience listening.
Yeah.
But it feels completely different if you're interviewing in front of a crowd than talking into a microphone.
True.
So I studied his style, and his style was not to overtalk. Pace yourself, meaning don't speak too quickly. People feel nervous when you talk fast. So keep your pace, laid back. Now, I do catch myself when I'm really enjoying an interview that I'm conducting, I'll start to speed up. And it's just a natural thing to do, but then I'll try to catch myself and really pace it back because I want people to feel comfortable when they're listening to that interview. And I think most interviewers, they talk way too much. And I think I coach our hosts, kind of speed it up on the front end. Don't take 5 minutes getting your guest on. You can fill in some of the holes deeper on.
Later. I probably took too much time.
Well, we'll just have to cut that out, won't we?
That's why you're the program director, because you can make those decisions too. But that had to come though with, 30 plus years of experience now doing it.
Well, it's nurture and nature, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's in me, but I think I've also watched the best, like Barbara Walters. Is she that great? Well, there are people that are just as good as Barbara Walters, but why do you enjoy Barbara Walters? Well, you enjoy her because, again, she's laid back. She doesn't speak quickly. You feel comfortable. You can exhale while you're watching the conversation.
Right. And you don't know much about Barbara Walters in her personal life either.
No.
She's not talking about herself on the program.
Right.
With the guest. Yeah.
For someone to put in a personal anecdote, it better, I tell our hosts, it better really make sense that you took the time to put that in there. Like I'll do that sometimes.
Have you ever thought about teaching a class on interviewing? No?
No.
Well, speaking of classes, that is something that has come naturally to you, though, is teaching. You have... I'm laughing because the smile on David's face. But, I remember years ago, this was early on in Oasis Network history, but you actually taught it was a class. It was a regular class on Spanish, in Spanish and on Spanish. Tell us about doing that.
Well, when I said our major was telecommunications, I had to make up that because it was really a minor, but I made up for it because I went on to get a master's degree in journalism, but nobody be impressed by that because I don't know if you want to go into that or not, but getting a master's degree is not what you think it's going to be as far as the experience. But my main major in college was Spanish. Now, where did that come from? I do not know. I have no Latino blood in me. It's just something that's there. In fact, it's kind of sat dormant for a while. I don't know if that will resurrect itself.
Now, when you say sat dormant, we're talking, this was not, this was a very big part of your life.
Huge. I would go to Latin America at least 5 times a year for a stretch of years.
Wow. Yeah, that's not, and you know what I mean when I say this, that's not normal. But no, it's not typical.
It was a passion. So yeah. Even now I'm curious, why do I have that passion? But just like you were talking about earlier, things coming around, it's definitely been pushed in the pause mode for a while. So maybe it will unpause and resume in another way.
Well, that was part of actually kind of making that comment, was part of coming around to things that have been a part of your life. Again, yes, I mean that for our listeners because I see that as well happening for us. But part of the idea is, as we're talking with David Warren today, to really understand people and kind of get into here's who they are, here's kind of what makes them tick. This was one of those areas that was not the typical idea. Your parents don't speak Spanish, do they?
No.
They were not going to Latin America on a regular basis. Never took you on a missions trip there.
No.
And yet you were so into this.
You even followed me to Guatemala.
I certainly did. Gosh, what's the theme here? I followed you to your apartment to do this recording.
It was my second summer of 3-month stays in Guatemala, and being besties that you and I are, I said, come to Guatemala.
You sure did, and I sure did.
Yeah, and it was for missions too, so you did.
It was medical missions.
Yes.
We stood in, it was heat. It felt like 100-degree plus, and but people were lined up for miles to come in the hills of Guatemala to come to medical missions. And what was so amazing about that for me, so again, because I've known David for so long, I've seen and experienced so much of life because I follow him everywhere. But I've seen so much of life with him because we've experienced a lot of life together. And
right. And I do want to add too,
yes,
if you're just tuning in, my interviewer today, as this is my first time of being interviewed here on Oasis in 36 years of being here, is my predecessor, Kim Spence. She hosted the Roadshow before I hosted the Roadshow. And I kept having all these ideas for you.
Yes.
When they were really for me.
Right. Interesting how that happens. But I remember.
But I want to add this, that you and I were put on pause for many, many years.
Right.
You know years better than I do, but I'd have to say it was at least a stretch of 10, maybe 15 years.
15.
Okay.
Yeah. Put on pause, literally not being in each other's life. And that was after literally seeing each other every single day, working together because we worked together. We played together. I mean, we hung out at my grandparents' table, Mama and Papa Martin, on a regular basis, and at, around my mom and me around your parents. That's what I mean. When I say I love this family, I mean, the history is still rich. And again, when I say sometimes things can feel like they're put on pause and you think, is this something that's ever going to be picked back up? Well, here we are. And that stretch of time, though, I look back at that and think, how quickly, though, too, the years go. But I am very thankful to be here with David today. I'm thankful for our history together. I just, going back to the Spanish part of you, the Latin part of you, and speaking Spanish is, David, for those of you who have never seen him in action in that way, the ministry that you had during that time, I remember in Guatemala, that's what I started to say too, was so amazing because you were doing the interpreting. You were, somebody would come in and you would be ministering to them. And I remember the photo of there were dozens and dozens of kids standing around you.
I remember that picture.
Yeah. And you had your arms outstretched.
Had a red shirt on.
Yeah. And you were just a magnet for the kids there, I remember. But that was quite a ministry time that you had.
Well, who knows? Stay tuned.
Yeah. And you did teach, by the way.
I did teach.
You taught my grandmother.
Well, I did. And I also taught in Mexico. I taught university professors a course in Mexico. Now that's a crowd you can't kid.
Well, you were accepted to.
Oh, well, that's a different university in Mexico that I was accepted to, the Technological Institute of Monterrey. And that's right when we started Oasis. I was very much in this, what do I do?
Yeah, it was MIT in Mexico.
It was the MIT in Mexico.
I mean, that's a huge.
It's a big deal. You have to take it.
Yeah, I don't want to diminish that.
You have to take a test to get in past it.
Yeah.
And
references, I'm sure.
But anyhow, I picked Oasis over that.
Yeah. I remember when you came back, you had your car packed to the windows, the top of the windows, but you came back, you were drawn back.
I was, yes, I was definitely, I left my heart in San Francisco. I left my heart in Broken Arrow. So,
So that's why you're still here.
That's why I'm still here.
Yeah. And Oasis Network is all the better for it. I think about the change and the difference it would have been if not for David Warren having turned his car around and come back all those years ago.
Well, I don't think it would sound the same.
Right.
I will leave it at that.
Yeah. And that's not a self-serving comment. I just believe
it wouldn't sound the same.
That was a God moment and a God decision for you to, the Holy Spirit directed you to turn your car around. And here we are today. Just the same as David Ingalls having the dream, your father having the dream of starting a radio station. Think about the lives that have been impacted through the ministry.
One time I was at a Kenneth Hagin meeting. I don't know if my father would remember this. I want to say I don't remember which city it was in, but Kenneth E. Hagin actually called up my father, which wasn't out of the ordinary. And this was when he was speaking a word over someone or laying hands on a specific person. But then he said, the other David, meaning me. And so he actually put a hand on both of our heads at the same time.
Wow.
And started to pray. And so the only thing that I've ever been able to determine that meant, I think I'm right on this, is that it was a transference of the radio ministry, meaning that the love for radio that my father had would...
It's appropriate. It's okay.
Fill in the blank, come into me.
Yeah.
Because it sure wasn't a singing gift.
Yeah.
That wasn't the transference or a playing the piano gift. So I would think that's what it is.
So we're going to take a pause right here. I think it's an appropriate take a breath moment. The side of David Warren that we are getting to experience today, being on this interview on the other side of the microphone, he's agreeing to share things from his heart and his experience that we are getting to enjoy. Thank you for sharing that story. That is a powerful story. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about some more of these stories like that. But, I want to talk about what has happened to music in the past 20 years or so, and how Oasis Network, a lot of times we hear in ministry, in business, you've got to pivot, you've got to make these changes with society, you've got to go with the flow of what's happening. And I want to talk with you about your heart for how Oasis Network has changed with the times, but also kept the programming as fresh as it is, but as consistent as it is from the day that it started.
Okay.
So we'll come back and talk about that.
I'm David Warren, Program Director at Oasis Radio Network and one of the hosts of this podcast. All of our hosts enjoy hearing from you, our listening family, so drop us a note. Our email address is roadshow@oasisnetwork.org. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and you'll receive new episodes on your mobile devices. And now, back to the show.
On the Roadshow today, my name is Kim Spence. I'm the guest host.
How does that feel to say that?
It feels wonderful. I tell you what, I loved doing the Roadshow. And I'm the predecessor, as you mentioned before, even though we're the same age, by the way. I'm the predecessor in time frame. I love being here with you to do this because I've told you for a while that I believe people want to know more about you. And I know that's not necessarily a natural feeling for you because you always definitely think about guests first when it comes to interviews and things like that. But I was excited to be on this and do this with you today.
I'm a very good second fiddle.
I wonder where that phrase came from, first and second fiddle. We were in band together, as we mentioned before. I played the flute. David played the drums. And I never got even the second chair in band, but I was too intimidated to challenge people, which is what we had to do to move up in the ranks, so anyway. So I'm first chair today. David Warren is actually the guest. And David, you've heard for years and years on the radio, primarily in the role of host on the Roadshow. But you've also heard David during support days. You've heard him come in at various times. I mean, your role is vast.
Oh, yes. Program director is a better label of what I do,
Right.
because the Roadshow is recess hour for me. Like when they let you
Yeah.
out of school,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, the boring stuff,
Yeah.
to do the fun stuff. Although it's a lot of work to do it, so I
Yeah.
don't want to diminish that.
Yeah.
But it's,
Program director is the big role.
yes.
And when I say big role, I mean everything that you hear. So I want to define that. Everything you hear on Oasis Network goes through the hands of David Warren at some point.
At some point. Now, some things, you know, we don't preview everybody's program before it airs. I mean, we preview that person before they're brought on
Yeah.
as part of the Bible school.
Right.
Let's say, as a, you know, for the talk block that we have.
Sure.
But I mean, we prep their programs, so I don't know everything they're going to say. But here's the good news is we pick people that say the things that they should be saying,
Right. Right.
and that fit who we are, which is a word of faith,
Yes.
teaching,
Yes.
and also then music. It's got to fit the format. When I say fit the format, it needs to fit in our very wide musical styles, choice of musical styles. I mean, not hard, harsh rock, obviously. I mean, and not a lot of pop. We have a little bit in that, but we're more centric in our sound. And
Well, you know, the way that I learned
yeah, those I
decades-
have heard. I do want to interject here. I have heard every single song before.
Yes,
It went on the air.
Everything like that passes through you. Yeah,
Right.
right. And that's what I guess what I mean is yes, you're not listening to every jot and tittle of every little thing. You know,
Not of all the teaching broadcasts.
Right,
But of the
right.
songs, all of those have been examined, not just for does it fit our musical format,
Right.
but does it also fit in our word of faith belief system?
Right. That was something, learning that idea. Well, and I learned that through your father, David Ingalls. I learned really what I know now in my life about the idea of the value of what you listen to,
Even Christian music.
even Christian music, and probably especially Christian music, to be honest.
Well, because you'll swallow it whole
Right.
if it's got the label Christian on it.
Right. You think, well, it's good for me then.
One of our broadcasters the other day was reading the lyrics of the top 3 current top 40 Christian songs. That, by the way, not one of those songs is on our playlist. And he was reading the lyrics, and when you hear them back, a Bible reader would hear those lyrics and go, those are pretty weak spiritually.
So that brings me to my point that we mentioned when we were going to take our break. In the past 20 or so years, and probably maybe a little bit before that, but especially the past 10 to 20 years, Christian music in the church has changed a lot. And I mean, and boy, I don't want to step on people's toes, but you know, I'm not afraid to if it does. If as Kenneth Hagin used to say, if you can't say amen, then say oh me. But what I mean by that is that there has been a difference in the style. There has been a difference in the lyrics, as you mentioned. There has been a difference in the approach, even, of how the music is done. And so much of what we hear in other formats, even at church, is a style that it's very similar across the board through many different denominations.
Correct.
Now, even. Oasis Network has remained consistent in not only the approach, the variety, but also consistent in the message that you continue to put out for the listener. How have you decided to do that in the world that we're living in today?
Because there are still people putting out good music. I mean, they're ignored by the business side of Christian music. And so I got to say what jazzes me the most is, and I don't want to name names here, but when we or I discover an artist that would never get played on typical Christian radio in America. But their music's good.
Yeah.
It's good musically. It's good lyrically. And to be able to expose that person, that artist, to our listeners makes me feel really good.
That's so cool. I love that. And as you said, there are people like that are out there that are never going to get played.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, or the stations that you're referring to, they have completely forgotten their library that's 10 years or older.
Yeah.
And we just keep adding new stuff, and it's just more ingredients, but all those other ingredients are still there.
Yeah. You've never changed the formula.
No, and I think that would be
catastrophic.
Well, I think it would be suicidal, actually.
Yeah, it would.
To do that, because I hear top 40 Christian radio, not on Oasis, but I hear top 40 Christian radio laden with 5-minute stretches of commercials, and they're playing the same exact song list that you can get on Pandora or any of these other formats without commercials. So why in the world would you sit through 5 minutes of commercials if you could get the same song lineup over here?
True.
So we at Oasis need to be true to our call and unique. And, if you're unique, there will always be a demand for you.
Yeah, that's absolutely
right.
Like
we were looking for the gems, those songs. People who discover Oasis feel like they have found a gem.
Yes.
Out of all this
great
other.
way to put that. Love that. Yeah. It's like going and digging for diamonds.
Yeah, because if you're an Oasis fan, you're a fanatical fan.
Yeah. Yeah.
People don't go, well, I kind of like Oasis. Not our listeners. They love Oasis.
Yes. Yes. I remember learning the books of the Bible, 30 years ago now. I had never learned them all. I knew like half of the New Testament, and a few in order of the Old Testament. And guess how I learned it?
You learned it by a song that was from the Sparrow Music Company, and the song is called 66 Books. And it's very catchy, and we should probably play that more often for other people who don't know all 66 books in order or they're a little rusty.
Right. And you know what? Every time now when I'm somewhere and I'm thinking I need to look up a book of the Bible, I will sing that in my head at times, even to this day, because that was one of those things. And I learned about stories from the children's music that was played. Even that is intentional. I mean, that's what I love still about Oasis Network is it's not just David as a program director. You're making lists that of the order of music. Again, this is a very unique idea. You are not just tossing a group of songs in. How does that work?
Well,
the magic.
Well, it's tiresome is what it is, but necessary if I want it to be done correctly. And that is I look at the flow of every single day, song to song to song to song.
Every day.
Every single lineup of music that you hear other than the Roadshow. Like if my dad's hosting his Roadshow, I am not picking his music. He is picking his own music. But other than that, when we're in our music blocks, I've seen the flow and know if it's going to work or not. And I spend a lot of time rearranging things for the kind of flow that's going to not ever, hopefully, make you want to go push the off button or tune to another station.
How did you learn to do that?
I do not know.
Okay. Because it's really
It's in
unique.
my head.
Yeah.
It's in my head.
Yeah. It's not. Is that something you can teach?
No.
Is that the problem?
No. Now, we have programmers, and I love our programmers because there are certain programming rules that we have, and they can work out the music playlists to meet all the rules. But I will then look at that, and I'll play it all through in my head. Segues and all that. and clusters of songs. And how does this, if we just flip these two, this will make all the difference in the feel of this hour.
That's amazing, though, really. It's a lot of work.
And I got to say, that makes me a little nervous in that I don't know how to teach that. So, everybody pray I stay very healthy.
Well, and it's because we think, again, in the day that we're living in, we can computerize everything. Like, David,
Well, you
you're
can.
automated,
Oh,
right?
yeah. I mean,
So,
we have an automation. I mean, well, in radio, you have a traffic system, which has nothing to do with cars. And then it goes merged into the music program. And that's where our music programmers, we have 3 other people that do that. And then it's put into the automation system, which is the actual execution of all the elements mixed together that is playing on the air. Well.
So, David Warren.
But to answer that question, no, a program cannot. Okay, let me ask you this.
Okay.
Let me ask you this.
You're putting the interviewer hat on.
Let's go back to Mamaw days, your grandmother.
Yes.
Hazel Martin.
Yes. She lived to be 103.
Okay, 103. Well, she was a cook extraordinaire.
Yes.
Well, those same recipes exist in cookbooks.
Right. So
what's the difference? Just follow the recipe. What's the difference?
Very good
What's
point.
the difference in when I make it and when Mamaw made it?
Very good point. It may look similar, but it doesn't taste. And we made
we as in you.
We as in you and I. No, this is a you and I that experience that because we thought as in, of course, watching Mamaw make chicken and dumplings.
This is years ago.
This was probably 30 years ago. Well, maybe. Yeah, 30 years ago. We thought we could make chicken and dumplings, and just like what you're talking about, they didn't turn out quite like Mamaw's did. We had baseballs floating in the liquid because we could not quite put it all together.
Well, again, it goes back to...
It's a great point.
It's a combo of nurture and nature.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you can learn some of it,
yeah,
but some of it's just in you.
And you've grown up with it now for 36 years, and so it has become part of who you are.
Well, it's like my father. How do you play by ear?
Yeah.
How do you hear harmony notes? How do you know that's a seventh or a, whatever, 4 notes above? That's a language I don't speak.
Right.
But to somebody who speaks it, it's like they hear it in their head.
Yeah.
So.
Very interesting. Okay, so we are about out of time.
Are we?
Yes.
Well, good, because my stomach is over here growling.
It's growling. So is it time for dinner?
Yes.
We've been in David's apartment
Chicken
today.
And dumplings.
Sounds great to me.
I'm not making them.
Oh, I am so appreciative of the time. We're getting to know you, David, in a personal way, in addition to what you do, but also the love and the heart that you have for the people of Oasis Network. I mean, this is why. This is the why. It's the inspiration. You do what you do so well. And I know that from this listener, that's me, I'm pointing to myself, that thank you for all the time and attention that you give, because it does make a difference. Even when you wonder, is anybody listening out there? No, you have listeners, but it does make a difference. And I have enjoyed this thoroughly today. My name is Kim Spence.
And I'm David Warren. And do I get to take it back now?
Absolutely. This has been
another great Roadshow.